In the meantime, Kenya's President William Ruto says he is deeply alarmed by what he called a misunderstanding over the timing of the integration of Sudan's paramilitary force into the main army could have degenerated into such violent conflict. He is one of 3 African heads of state meant to be flying to Sudan's capital, Khartoum, to mediate an end to the fighting. After 5 days of bitter battles between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, more than 270 people have been killed. Rita urged both sides to immediately cease fire to allow unrestricted humanitarian access and to allow the mediation delegation to land. Elbashir Idris, a public affairs analyst, joins me from Cardiff, Wales, to unpack the latest development in Sudan. Thank you so much for joining me on NC Continental Prime.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's go back a bit, and can you provide insight into the diplomatic efforts that may have influenced Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the de facto leader and the head of the Rapid Support Forces, to consider a ceasefire in Sudan?
Well, thank you. So the original statement was that these 2 forces were supposed to come together to break a ceasefire during Monday. However, that was not honored and it was broken. It was the first ceasefire and it was supposed to happen between 3 till 7 p.m., only 4 hours long. Unfortunately, this ceasefire was broken within the first 30 minutes, as seen on reports on Twitter, social media, and video evidence of that. So in terms of trust and capability of the armed forces during those times, before the quick escalation that we've seen yesterday and today, furthermore, there was already a broken trust. And then a second ceasefire was announced, doctored by Secretary of State Blinken, that was supposed to be a 24-hour ceasefire from 6 p.m. Khartoum time yesterday till 6 p.m. today. However, unfortunately, this ceasefire had also been broken within the first 10 minutes, with people reporting a heavy mortar and airplane fire happening within the streets and capital of Khartoum. So there is no doubt that this ceasefire had no intention of it being followed, or perhaps the chain of command between the RSF and the SAF was very weak to not allow the orders reach to the troops on the ground and for this to expedite into a much more worse situation.
Now, 2 of them announced a ceasefire, but obviously they've broken the deal and there's been no ceasefire so far. We've also seen reports that there's heavy fighting in the airport, and of course we also see in Khartoum's palace. Now, what are the specific areas of this fighting that we're seeing in Sudan? Do we have heavy fighting being reported?
Well, it's a very strategic and careful place that we have to go for. If the Republican Palace is to the north, the airport is just slightly to the east of it. And in this gap in between here is Khartoum 2 and Amarat, which happens to be more of the affluent side of Khartoum, which usually holds the more, say, expats, diplomats within that area. So in between the airport and the Republican Palace is this very affluent area where a lot of this fighting is happening. Now, it's not sure whether this is done to scare the expats over there. However, a lot of the attacks that have been going on are there. And I'm also pretty sure you've seen the reports of UN and international staff and ambassadors being targeted. If anything, 2 days ago, the international worker was unfortunately sexually violated, along with other workers internationally who also had been hurt from the troops. This later escalated when the US diplomatic envoy was attacked by, some may claim, RSF troops. Even today, reported over an hour ago, the Norwegian ambassador's home had been bombed by mortar fire. So as we can see, the expats and the diplomats and all the international orgs who are based around this one center called Khartoum 2 and Amarat have been under heavy fire, and along with all the residents of and people of Sudan within that area. It is a major critical hub within the capital, and if this hub falls and is under attack, which we see now, then a lot of the country's operational capabilities, especially that of civilians, does for.
Now, it's been said that the reason for this fighting is out of power struggle between the Sudan military and the rapid support paramilitary support forces in Sudan. Now, can you take us back to what exactly is this power struggle that you're fighting with, and why we still have, despite the ceasefire, an intensification of the fighting?
Well, we can quickly go back to 2019 when the Sudanese revolution was happening, and then coming to after the fall of Elbashir on the 12th, 13th, 14th of April, then he made an order to invite this paramilitary force that is usually within the west in Darfur to come into the capital of Khartoum in order to restore peace within the area, which is quite absurd considering the violations of human rights records and their role in the Darfur genocide for the past 20 years. Then, after the fall of Elbashir, the armed forces and civilians, unfortunately, were forced to come into a power-sharing agreement that lasted for 2 years under the Prime Minister Hamdok. When this inevitably failed because of concessions made by the civilian government and the strong arming of the security sector on the civilians, it forced the Prime Minister to leave. When that happened, then the whole idea of civilian transition essentially failed, and the country's controls fell to that of the military and security sectors. The 2019 Juba Peace Agreement also does come into play, where there is supposed to be a unification of the different armed forces in Sudan. So the SPLA, the North Sector, the RSF, the Justice and Freedom Reformists, they were supposed to come together into one umbrella and absorbed into the Sudanese army. However, this has now failed, and now we have a paramilitary force gone rogue. We have a national army that is unfortunately struggling to deal with this at the moment. And we're not even going to go into the other kind of groups who are currently watching this situation. There are other armed groups and they are observing and monitoring. However, it's very, I would say, grateful that they did not make a sudden move at this moment. So it's a very precarious situation. And it also does involve regional players now, since order wishes to be restored. However, each country or regional player has their own proxy within Sudan that they wish to support.
All right, thank you so much, Elbashir. We're still trying to get a very clear picture of what is going on there. There have been talks about airstrikes, and you also mentioned the fact that people have been raped as part of the humanitarian situation. And from the reports we have, about 270 people have been killed. We also talked about the location of these airstrikes. Now, whose residences are located in the neighborhood in the western part of Khartoum, where the heavy fighting is taking place? And what's the situation for the hospitals? Because we hear that the hospitals are being overburdened in Sudan.
That is correct. I would like to start off with the hospitals because it is an important situation. The electricity grid in Sudan is currently down, and the petrol that's needed, the infrastructure and the kind of level of coordination needs the army in that. However, due to the fighting, it's very preoccupied, as well as there's been reports and footage of electrical poles and substations being damaged. So it puts us in a very bad situation in terms of access to medicine, especially for those in hospitals, especially in communication. Since electricity is down, but the internet is up, the rest of the world is watching bit by bit how the communication people on the ground in Sudan are losing that touch to the outside world, and the requests for aid and help in hospitals, because they do not have electricity to even charge their phones and communicate with one another. Now, the hospitals themselves have become very overburdened with the amount of collateral damage the Sudanese people that they find themselves in. However, it does extend to RSF and unknown armed forces, perhaps SAF as well, who have been going into these hospitals to create fear and panic and terror. Now, when you have this situation going on, then, as you say, the best thing to do is to leave, and that's what the people have done. And to further add on to your original question, was the western part of Khartoum, which is Khartoum Iknin, so Khartoum 2, Amarat, Damazin, no, that's a state, and a few other ones. they have been essentially under heavy fire. So trying to find a safe passage and trying to get people living within those areas to leave into a place of safety is proving to be quite difficult. Had been previously occupied by Islamists in the past within this affluent area. However, due to after the fall and the revolution, these Islamist forces eventually moved out. So bringing in these expats and other affluences which do not follow the ideology of the previous Islamist regime. And because of this, this place has now become almost collateral damage, and it's where most of the fighting is occurring.
All right, thank you so much. We'll definitely keep our eyes fixed on situations in Sudan, and we do hope that the two groups will agree to the ceasefire that is being called. Thank you so much, Elbashir Idris, for joining us on NC Continental Prime.
Thank you.